All right, great. Hey, Ted, how are you doing?
Hmm.
All right. This is Russell with the Case for Baseball Hall of Fame podcast. Got a great episode here. We've got Ted Knorr, a fellow baseball fan, diehard baseball fan, and he's going to talk to us today about Rap Dixon. Ted, thanks for showing up on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I don't know a lot about Rap Dixon, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say. But I've got to ask you first. We were talking a little bit before we started. You got to walk me through your man cave there. It looks amazing. What are we looking at there?
Well, I have 10 lockers in the cave, and the ones you don't see, I have mine, which there's a 1979 vintage MTV jacket in
Wow.
it. Next to that is Mazeroski. Then you got Josh Gibson, Jackie Robinson, and Buck O'Neill shares one with Satchel Paige.
Wow.
The ones you can see, and I don't know my left from the right in a Zoom broadcast, but over here is Mark McGuire. I just have a T-shirt. He doesn't have a
Nice.
jersey. Next to him is the hero, Rap Dixon. Then there's Oscar Charleston. These are the outfielders of the Harrisburg Giants between 1924 and 1927. And then the beautiful Phil Dewey of Ann Arbor, Michigan, portrait of Rap Dixon is obscuring Fats Jenkins. He's the left fielder. And in my opinion, they're the greatest outfield in baseball's segregated era, better than
Wow.
anything that included Cobb, Speaker, or Ruth.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to hear about this. I want to ask you a little bit. So Harrisburg, what's your connection to Harrisburg? Is that where you're from? Is that where you're located?
Harrisburg's where I live,
Okay.
and I got married 11 years ago, so I guess it's where I will continue to live. But
Congratulations. Yeah.
I was born in Pittsburgh, and
Okay.
that's a Negro League base. Perhaps
Sure.
Kansas City might be more so, but not much. Pittsburgh has a deep Negro League history. And then I was raised in Lancaster,
Okay.
which is the home of the APA Game Company, which, uh, if you may find, is one of my two pillars of my baseball knowledge.
Okay. Great, great. I haven't been to Harrisburg in years. I used to spend a lot. When I live in the East Coast, I drive through Pennsylvania a lot. Beautiful part of the country. I love it.
Yeah. Well, Lancaster is God's country,
Oh yeah.
but Harrisburg's nice too. And the Susquehanna, what a baseball river that is.
Yeah, for sure.
It opens in Cooperstown. The west branch of the Susquehanna is in Cooperstown. Then you have Williamsport. Uh, on the eastern branch, there's a couple other, they're not escaping, they are escaping my mind, baseball towns. And then Harrisburg, Havre de Grace used to have a team. I'm probably leaving somebody out, but it's a marvelous baseball river.
Great. Yeah, very wonderful. Well, Ted, tell us a little bit about you and your background. I meant to introduce you as a fellow baseball fan. Tell us about your career and what got you interested in baseball.
Well, it wasn't because I played it. I mean, we all played baseball all day long as kids.
Sure.
The only team I ever tried out for at 12, I didn't make, and that was my organized baseball career. I did play a little football. You don't have to be an athlete. A little bit of size can go a long way.
Sure.
But even that, I didn't. I never made it to JV. So I had a couple years, including playing on the baseball field we might talk about. So I don't want to
Oh,
ignore that. Yeah,
yes,
a
please.
field that Ruth played on, I played football on.
Really? Would
Maybe I should interject it here in case we don't touch it.
Yeah, tell us about
Rossmere,
that.
Rossmere Baseball Park
Okay.
was a minor league park for the Lancaster Red Roses at the turn of the century, a year ago. I mean, a decade ago, a century ago. But it was knocked over in 1912. In the 20s, it provided a Sunday home for the Harrisburg Giants, this outfield behind me.
Okay.
And that's a story in its own, which we don't have time. Pennsylvania blue laws were as strict as any in the country.
Sure.
The Philadelphia Athletics almost left the state in the late 30s or early 40s because they couldn't make money on Sundays and they wanted to play on Sundays. They pressured the state legislature and didn't get anywhere. But for some reason, I don't know the answer, in Lancaster, a conservative community, they allowed the Harrisburg Giants to play Sunday games at this minor league ballpark, making it now, based on Major League Baseball's December 2020 ruling, making Rossmere Baseball Park a major league park.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I
That's
was
cool.
11 in six-man football, I played two games on that field. So once I started to get a hint, I had no idea. I went to college, high school there, and I had no idea that it was built on a baseball site. I've since then I've educated myself, and I cherish those memories on that field.
That's wonderful. That's amazing.
Yeah, oh
Very
yeah.
cool. Very cool. So, many people are fortunate to have their careers in baseball, but a lot of people like myself have a regular day job, and this is our passion. Did you work in baseball, or was this a passion you had, outside of work?
It's a passion, I think, influenced by my dad and I love of history. I majored in math because late 60s there was a lot of history majors for some reason. I think it might have been that war that was going on, and there was it didn't seem like the job market was going to be there, and so I majored in math, and that helps too in baseball history, of course.
Sure.
But two influences that made baseball come to the forefront. One is the APBA Major League Baseball game, which is created in Lancaster and lived there for years until we moved to Alpharetta, Georgia.
Oh, great.
That's where
Yeah.
it, that's where it presently is, very well managed down there. And that's a simulated baseball game where players, you know, reproduce their real life stats by rolling dice
Very
or
cool.
in today's age by generating random numbers in a computer. But in any case, that was one influence. The other is until years later, I joined Sabre in 1979.
Great.
And between those two, uh, I keep pretty busy with looking up old ball games. No longer microfiche, thank God. Now newspapers.com works pretty well.
The internet's great for this kind of research.
Yes, it is.
And it's funny because you sound like me. It's a full-time job getting into the hobby of researching about baseball, but my wife sometimes will come in and say, "I'm worried you're working hard." I said, "I've already worked my work. This is working fun." What's the old saying? They don't say work ball, they say play ball. We're playing ball when we're reading about baseball, reading research and stats. So it's fun.
I get the same advice from my wife too.
Yeah, yeah. I said work time's over. I'm having fun. Tell us about the Harrisburg Giants. How you first heard of the team and got interested in learning about the team.
Well, I used to work for City Hall Lancaster, and
Okay,
then I took a job with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in Harrisburg.
great.
And I got into and my office was in the state library. So I just, even on lunch hours, I could go down and get on the microfiche and see what was happening. And it was there around 1988, 89 that I discovered that the Harrisburg Giants, I recognized them as a major league team, but of course, Major League Baseball didn't until 2020. But this was a pretty darn good team with several Hall of Famers, and they played games in Lancaster. So we already covered that, but that's sort of what hooked me on to the Harrisburg Giants. And then I find out about the outfield. Oscar Charleston, Hall of Fame 1976, the first dead outfielder put in from the Negro Leagues. In
Hmm.
other words, the best of the outfielders of the Negro Leagues. The other two that went in ahead of him went in because they were alive, which was good policy. But Charlie is the one who's the best known. The left
Sure.
fielder behind me here, Fats Jenkins, is in the Basketball Hall of Fame.
What?
1963, his whole team was put in. They're called the Renaissance Five, and they were in 1939, I believe, they were the first professional world basketball champions. But
Wow.
he's also one of the 12 greatest Negro League outfielders, according to the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And one last athletic point about Fats, in 1920, as we were putting our Olympic team together to go to Antwerp, Fats lost in the finals in his weight class in boxing. So Fats is, Michael Jordan's pretty good, but Fats wasn't bad either. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And then the right fielder is the man we're going to talk about.
Yeah, well, let's get right to it because we are here to hear you talk about Rap Dixon, a player that I really didn't know a lot about until recently, and I appreciate you reaching out to me. You have, I believe, a PowerPoint here. You want to get into Rap Dixon? Let's make the case for him. Let's hear about him.
Right. Well, how I like to begin any lecture I give on Negro League baseball is to point out, and I don't mean to diminish how bad the athletes suffered and the African American population suffered,
Sure.
but the last victims of the segregation of baseball prior to 1947 are us. We don't know much of anything about half of baseball history in the first half of the 20th century. And I mean, that sometimes turns people off. I've known people that have an attitude, well, if I never heard of it and I know everything about baseball, how good could it be?
Yeah.
Well, that's an indictment of the man in the mirror there. It's not an indictment of black baseball. Uh, Major League Baseball ignored the Negro Leagues in 1969 when they originally decided which six leagues at the time were major. Uh, in December of 2020, they reevaluated and they had seven Negro leagues to the mix. Now,
And it's been
why?
fascinating since then, just seeing the stats on Baseball Reference and being able to read about them. And I feel like every day I'm learning new players, new stories of the Negro Leagues. It's incredible. And we lost Buck O'Neil a few years ago, and it's like the the players that are still around from those days are dwindling. So we want to hear their stories, and I love hearing about these. So anyway, I don't want I'll let you go continue. Yeah.
You're doing a good job of filling because I somehow lost my PowerPoint share.
Yeah, no
Oh,
worries.
okay, back on target. To talk about Rap Dixon as a Hall of Famer, we must first know what makes a player a Hall of Famer.
Sure.
The Hall of Fame instructs its voters to base their decisions on these six uh, characteristics: record, ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contributions to the game. For tonight's presentation, I'm going to focus on three subgroups of those: statistics, opinions, and legends. And the man who's going to tell us about rap statistics is going to be John J. McGraw, the
Great.
winningest manager in the history of the National League to this day. Uh, he's going to provide a perspective on Dixon's record and ability. And then we'll get into the opinions and the legends if we have time. But let's start with McGraw. This is the winningest manager in National League history and also considered one of the greatest assessors of baseball talent. And this is the headline in the February 1926 Harrisburg Telegraph. McGraw praises Herbert Dixon, star outfielder. And he goes on to say, Dixon is, without question, one of the greatest outfielders in the United States.
Wow.
Now, what does that mean? I don't know. Does that mean top three? If he had to, in February of 26, pick an all time outfield, was Dixon in it? Or top five, top 10, top 24? We'll come back to that to answer that question in a little bit.
That's a
But
big
what we
quote from a big
it's a
baseball
beautiful
guy.
quote.
Yeah.
And one thing I need to point out, if you read books on the Negro Leagues and on McGraw, he never saw a black ball player he didn't like. But very few of those references include an anchor, such as a quote. Uh, you hear him trying out players and loving this guy if he only was white and stuff like that. But what I like about rap, here we have Dixon, McGraw quoted as saying Dixon was a great outfielder, one of the greatest in the country. But
Great.
as a scout, McGraw never saw a statistic of rap.
Sure.
He had the eyes of a scout. So I'm going to go through the 5 tools and let's see if McGraw's statement holds up to a statistical look. Here's the top 10 OPS plus, that is on base plus slugging normalized against all players in the league. That 146 of Raps is the highest. Uh, and then there's 9 others, which we don't need to really get into the others. But of all players that bat as often as Rap does, and I make no qualms about using Raps uh, at bat as a good place to start because his career is only 14 years long. That's
Okay.
one of the reasons why he's not in the Hall. And so if his at plate appearance number is low, uh, anyone under that is even lower. So
Sure.
I think this is a good way. And you see, nobody has a higher OPS plus in the Negro Leagues than Rap Dixon.
Wow.
Hit with power. Well, nobody in the Negro League database, Seamhead's database, has a higher slugging percentage than Rap Dixon. Also, I should point out no one hits more home runs per year that's not in the Hall than Dixon.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So these lists are amongst Negro leaguers that are not in the Hall of Fame, correct?
The list I'm putting on, yes. But of
Okay.
course,
Yeah.
in Seamheads, which seamheads.com, if any listener wants to find out about statistically how Negro League players did against themselves, it's a marvelous site.
Great.
Everything on it is backed up by a newspaper box score. That's not the same as Major League Baseball, where there are official league statistics.
Sure.
That's very rare in the Negro Leagues, although in the 40s, Hal Sports Service did do a couple years of Negro American League statistical data. Rap run. Well, this is my little, once again, I'm using Seamhead's data,
Great.
but in order to rank players in terms of speed, I rank them based on their run scoring rate. And I took home runs out. I don't want to double count that. A home run also is a run
Sure.
per 162 games. Their triple rate per 162 games, and their stolen base rate per 162 games. So this gives you a defensible speed rating. Not saying there's not better, but I think this is pretty good. And then all I did was add up their rankings. And in Dixon's case, he's sixth in one, sixth in another, and tie for fourth. So that's 16 plus. You'll notice nobody is faster than that, if you will. And I got to tell you, I've also done this chart with the whole population, And he's right up there with Cool Papa Bell and Oscar Charleston and Sam the Jet Jethro. Dixon is at the top using this speed judgment among Negro League speedsters. Field. Well, now we're getting into the weeds here, but the Seamheads database has three metrics: fielding percentage, range factor,
Mhm.
and runs saved by arm. And the way I rank these guys, and here you'll notice I'm ranking these only Hall of Famers here, plus Dixon.
Okay.
Although Dixon is one of only 4 or 5 outfielders that's better than average in 8 of those 9 metrics. There's nobody better than average in all 9. Uh, so Rapp's at the top. Charleston, I would put him ahead of Rapp because he played more games in the outfield. Um, so that's a tiebreaker. But if you look here, the average Hall of Famer is better than 5 of these 9 metrics.
Wow.
Again, 3 metrics, 3 positions: fielding, range, and run saved by arm in each of the 3 outfield positions. Free throw. This is his strength. He wore number 21 in 1935. That's the only uniform number I know of Rap. But of course, when you speak of throwing, 21 is the number.
21's the
Uh,
number, the great Roberto. Yeah.
that's
He had a
exactly right.
cannon. Yeah.
Yep. Well, Rap, and here I've added a second column here just to make relativity interesting. Rap saved, and this sounds doesn't sound like much, but it's the highest number of runs saved by arm in the the Seamheads Negro League database, 16.1. And if you set that to 100, Vic Harris, who's number 2, would be 24% behind. So that just gives you an idea of this is the best arm in the Negro leagues, and he's 24% ahead of the second best.
Wow.
It turns out the way this statistic works, and this is not a Seamhead statistic only, 0 is the average arm. So you're going to find, including almost all the Negro League Hall of Fame outfielders, have negative arms.
Really?
Yeah. Now, let's wrap the stats up because some people, it's not their favorite part.
Oh, it's a huge part of the Hall of Fame discussion. I mean, a lot of times it really
So
comes down to the stats, but there's,
I think you're right.
yeah,
Once again, McGraw said, without question, one of the greatest outfielders in the United States.
sure.
This chart includes lifetime OPS,
Wow.
on base plus slugging, of the 24 Hall of Fame outfielders active in either 25 or 26. So this would be the people that McGraw would have been comparing Dixon with. And you can see there's only 3 of those 24 that are ahead of Dixon. Ruth, Stearns, and Charleston from the Negro Leagues, Turkey Stearns and Oscar Charleston,
Two great players.
and then Raps number 4. So we were wondering, what did McGraw mean? Top 3, top 5, top 10. Well, if he meant top 25, Rap is certainly in the list. And if he meant top 3, Rap misses by just a tad. So Rap Dixon by OPS matches the scout's eye that McGraw had.
Wow.
Okay, and I can see a chart that I thought I had was missing, but I think it's a little. Let's lighten things, leaving statistics and go by opinions.
Sure.
This is the opinion of the Hall of Fame. There are 7 Negro League outfielders in the Hall. You see them on the left. I'm going to read their names: Monty Irvin, the first in; Cool Papa Bell, the second in. Both were alive. Oscar Charleston, none of these other guys were living, unfortunately. But Oscar Charleston is the third man in, Turkey Stearns the fourth man in, and I personally do think Charleston and Stearns are the two best Negro League outfitters of all time.
Okay.
And then in 2006, Pete Hill, Cristobal Torriente, and Willard Brown go in. But on that same ballot in 2006 were five other outfielders. I list them here as tie for eighth. But let's go from the bottom up. The great Spotswood Poles. There's a name for you. Uh, Paul Robeson, the historian, actor, activist, he ranked Spot Poles as the best baseball player he ever saw. Then
Wow.
we have, yeah. And then we have Fats Jenkins as we move up the list. We've already discussed him briefly. Him and Charleston play along with Rap from 1924 through 27. Then there's Alejandro Olms, Roy Parnell, and then the best statistics of these five we've already seen. Uh, I don't know if I mentioned Parnell got mentioned, Jenkins got mentioned. Olms and Poles didn't have enough plate appearances to get mentioned. So Dixon holds up pretty well. But now let's talk to the first three put into the Hall as an outfielder. What does Monty Irvin say? Well, in his autobiography written with another Georgian, James A. Riley, uh, Monty ranks these outfielders on page 233 of his book.
Wow.
Charleston's first, Bell is second, Stearns is third, and then he names a guy who played in the same era as Irvin, Wild Bill Wright. So, in Irvin's opinion, Wild Bill Wright would be the first one he'd put in that's not in. But
Okay.
right behind Wild Bill is Rap Dixon.
Rap Dixon. And then looks like people further down the list are already in the Hall of Fame. Pete Hill and Cristobal Torriente.
Spot Poles is not in the Hall, but
Yeah.
Hill and Torriente, yes. Cool Papa Bell. In this book written by Nick Asasella and Donald Dewey, all kinds of players are included here. As you can see, from Ty Cobb to Willie Mays, they list their all-time teams. And
That's so
Cool
cool.
Papa Bell, yeah, it is cool. It's a very good book. Cool Papa Bell on page 10 names his all-time team to include, and I'm glad he does this. He puts Charleston at first. That opens up an outfield spot for one of these other three. He doesn't rank them other than these are the three greatest outfielders: Monty Irvin, Turkey Stearns, both in the Hall, and then he names Rap Dixon.
That's pretty good endorsement right there.
That's a very good endorsement, but
Yeah.
here's the best. Here's the best endorsement. In 1949, the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin asked Oscar Charleston, "What's your all time team?" And in the outfield, he put Martin Diego in left. And of course, that's another story in its own right. This man went into the Hall as a second baseman, is
Okay.
listed now as a pitcher, and Charleston is saying he thinks he's one of the three greatest outfielders of all time.
Wow.
Flanking the center fielder is Cristobal Torriente. And of course, both Torriente and Diego are in the Hall. And it's important to note both are Afro Cuban.
Okay.
So I don't know how to interpret this any other way but to say Rap Dixon, in the eyes of Oscar Charleston, is the greatest African American outfielder he ever saw.
Wow.
And yes, and one other point. Both Diego and Torriente played a higher percentage of their games in center field,
Okay.
Charleston's old position. Yet Charleston puts Rap in his old position.
Wow.
Composite of those three opinions ranks outfielders in this order: Charleston number one, Dixon over all the Hall of Famers number two, and then Stearns and on down. Uh, so those 10 outfielders are mentioned by those three guys I just talked, and Dixon's right there at the top. Now, before we close opinions, let's go back to what the Hall says should be our criteria. Record. I've just spent, I don't know, 20 minutes. I think the record speaks for itself. We've covered that pretty well. Uh, I'll certainly stand for questions when I'm done. Rap Dixon, we covered the five tools. He is not a borderline five tool player. This man is at the peak of each of the tools using rate stats, I must point out. Rap
Right.
is only around for 14 years, but his ability cannot be questioned. Integrity, I, I guess I'm ahead of myself here. If we get to the legends, Rap was the first manager, professional manager for future Hall of Famer Leon Day. And I spoke to Leon in 1991 at the Pratt Library in Baltimore.
Oh,
And
wow.
Leon didn't have a lot to say, although he's quoted by others as saying Dixon is one of the three outfielders on his all time team. But Leon, he told me that Rap Dixon, we're talking about integrity here, his father, Leon was 17 or 18 when he joined the Baltimore Black Sox. Leon's dad had to approve that, and meeting and knowing Rap, who was going to be his manager, allowed Leon's dad to say, "Go for it."
Wow.
Sportsmanship, another thing we'll get to soon. In 1927, Rap goes to Japan
Yeah.
with a great team. Biz Mackey's on the team, a Hall of Famer. So is Andy Cooper. They lose one game, and that game they lost 1-0 because in their last at bat with Rap on third base and one out, there was a fly ball to the right fielder. Catch is made, 2 outs. Rap comes home and ties the game. And the runner on first base gets caught between first and second for the third out. The umpires blew it, uh, and the black team that lost in Japan to a Japanese team did not complain. That shows you the sportsmanship uh, of the team and Rap. Character,
Sorry, can I interject a little bit
sure,
there?
please,
Yeah, I
please.
was on Mitch Bernstein's podcast, and we talked a little bit about Rap Dixon and some of the Negro League stars touring Japan. It's a fascinating story. There were stories that Emperor Hirohito himself, this is of course pre-war, where came out to see the players and give them trophies. And I believe this predated the Major League Baseball players barnstorming tour. Um, and I thought there was a funny quote. I don't remember who it was from off the top of my head, but it pointed out that the Negro League players were much more well behaved than their Major League counterparts, which Mitch and I got a good laugh
Yes,
thinking, well, I'm sure Babe Ruth,
yeah,
he had to go see what the saloons look like in Tokyo. You got to
yeah.
compare and contrast to
Well,
the
yeah.
saloons back
Well,
home. So I don't know if Babe was necessarily probably on his best behavior, but
no.
the Negro League stars were. So
Yes. And what they really were, the book about that tour is called Gentle Black Giants.
yeah.
And they won their game 7-2, 6-3, 10-5. The major league team 8 years later, I'm talking about the Ruth tour, they won their game 17-2, 12-0.
Hmm.
Very discouraging. Kaz Sayama, a Japanese historian, he wrote that book, and Bill Staples has finally translated it and got it published in America. But Kaz is very complimentary to the play, the gentle Black Giants, not not arguing even when a run that would tie a game was disallowed.
Hmm.
Uh, they set the tone. They permitted the Japanese to grow in their baseball skills. Whereas if the Ruth tour came first, it might have discouraged. Ruth played a game in the outfield with a parasol up, and Ruth played a game at first, and Gehrig was in the outfield. I mean, they disrespected, at least in Kaz's eyes and in my eyes, the the game of baseball.
Yeah.
Uh,
I was going to stop you and just say that's another fun rabbit hole I've gotten into recently is learning the history of Japanese baseball. Um, like a lot of us have just been spellbound watching Shohei Ohtani the past few years.
oh
And
yes,
the more I learn about him, it's made me curious about Japanese baseball and hearing stories like this. Reading about Lefty O'Doul. I'm going to do an episode about Lefty O'Doul
oh left field do great.
someday. And
Yep.
so we get off on a whole separate conversation, but the story of the Negro Leagues and the story of Japanese baseball are so fascinating. There's so many characters and stories. A lot of it's new to me, and a lot of it's new, I think, to a lot of American baseball fans. But if you take the time to read about it, it's fascinating.
You need to get in your library Gentle Black Giants
All right.
because that one thing it shows that we I don't want to skim over neither the Dixon tour in 27 or the Ruth tour in 34-35 are the only examples of major league and or collegiates or there were probably several score of Americans going over, including before 27. Uh, non-major league, but uh, baseball ambassadorship. Unfortunately, it kind of fell apart in the 40s, but was really a good tool towards uniting the countries a little better.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, speaking of falling apart, I had Chuck Brodsky on the podcast, a singer-songwriter he's a Phillies fan. He's from up in Philadelphia. So um, we were talking about Mo Berg and some of those later tours. Mo Berg was an American
Yes.
catcher who was a spy.
Yep.
So things
Yep.
had gotten a little tense. They said, "Oh, Mo, while you're playing, we need you to take some pictures." And I believe
Yep.
they used some of the intel he gathered for the Tokyo bombing raids. So,
They
things got a
did.
little tense, but
Yep.
again, I don't want to get off in history, but once the war was over and there was the rebuilding of Japan, baseball was something. I had always just thought that they got into baseball after the war. That's not true. They were already pretty
That's
crazy
right.
about baseball from before the war.
Yes.
And then after the war, when the rebuilding was happening, it was baseball is a fun distraction. So it's a fascinating story, the story of baseball in Japan because it brings in one the Japan sort of getting out of their isolationism in the 1800s, and then everything before World War II, and the aftermath. So it ties a lot together in a great way. So anyway, not to get off on a soapbox, but
No, but it's a great topic to get off
yeah,
on. Back to as you were just mentioning, uh, which tour was more important? I happen to think, and Kaz doesn't say that the 27 Negro League Tour was more important than the Ruth. He does say it was necessary for the psychology of
hmm
Japanese baseball players. But here's the deal the one tour takes place in 1927, the other is in 34, the end of 34. The Nippon Professional Baseball League that you reference begins in 35.
hmm
It's hard for me to think that the Ruth Tour had that much effect that overnight a league pops up. I think the starting date for the Nippon League um, is more consistent with the 27 tour and others
sure.
in between. But I'm at a break point here. If as you edit you want to go, but what I have left, we've covered the statistics and we've covered the opinions.
Sure. Did you need to take a quick break or anything? Or did you?
No, I just meant that we're getting long. Of I'm getting long. No, I'm good.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah.
I have
We can keep
12
going.
legends that I want to cover.
Yeah, yeah. We'll go through the PowerPoint and then I'll ask a few questions and yeah. Okay.
Okay. Some of these are going to be repetitive, which is great. For example, we already talked about this outfield. This beautiful portrait was recently done by an artist named Beth England, and it depicts the very first game in Williamsport's Bowman Field, where they do now play major league games there, I think once a year. Uh, and the background there is all Bowman Field 1927 before it was even called Bowman Field. But this is Fats Jenkins on the left, Oscar Charleston in center, and Rap Dixon in right.
It's awesome.
And
It's a great,
I,
great little
I
painting.
yeah, the easiest scene reason for them to be the greatest outfield is two during the segregated era. Two reasons. It's the only one that has three outfielders on the Hall of Fame's list of 12.
Okay.
And it's also one of only three intact for 4 years in Negro League history. And there's only about 20 intact for 4 years in Major League history. Oh, back to Japan.
Wow.
Kaz Sayama, the author of Gentle Black Giants, he sent me this, 25 years ago. This is Rap standing on home plate, pitching balls over distant fences. When he was in Japan, he also ran the bases in 14 and 1/5 seconds, which
Wow.
is not the fastest, but it's still damn fast.
That's really
Uh,
fast.
yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention a couple other things. He hit a home run so far in Koshi, not a home run. It was a triple back in the 20s, especially with a deader ball, which is what they had in Japan in the 20s, according to Kaz. If you could hit the fence with a hit ball, especially where no one else ever had, they marked Koshien Stadium in the outfield wall with a big white mark where Rap Dixon hit it.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, so his five tools that McGraw noticed were obvious to the Japanese. This is a picture of a trophy, as you mentioned. Emperor Hirohito, and I do have to put this in a legend category.
Yes.
There's no photos of Hirohito giving a trophy to anybody, but the legend, even in Gentle Black Giants, in fact, from an MLB.com article in the late 90s or early aughts, the trophy was given to Hirohito. I mean, to Dixon. Hirohito gave it to Dixon,
Wow.
probably for that ball that was hit in Koshien Stadium. Now, here's a picture that shows the trophy being held by Biz Mackey and Lonnie Goodwin, who was the team manager, owner, executive. So the trophy photographically definitely exists, but India Garnett, who is Rap Dixon's great niece, she tells me that trophy was in their family for years, passed
Wow.
from family member to family member. And one other story on the trophy. And to me, these two stories, these two eyewitnesses make it very believable. Not necessarily this Loving Cup trophy, as this is the one that India Garnett describes, but Syke Burnett, who as a teenager played for Rap Dixon in the early 40s, Rap showed him a trophy that was a small statuette of a baseball player encased in jewels,
Whoa.
as only the
Wow.
emperor could do. Now, whether there's any validity to either of these two stories, they are fun to hear, and I heard both Syke and India say it. Uh, Moving straight ahead, the major league record for consecutive hits is 12. There are three players that have done that since I think 1903, the first one. In 1929, Rap cracked 14 straight hits and reached 16 straight times.
Wow.
Major League Baseball is currently studying this. I would love it if they would see it as a new major league record. There's a couple reasons that I really don't want to discuss, but that they might not see it that way. And the same thing with the 16 consecutive reaches. He walked twice.
Okay.
The major league record in terms of reaches is held by one man, and his name's Teddy Ballgame.
Okay.
In the late 50s, Ted Williams reached 16 straight times. So that's not a bad man to share a record with.
Not at all. I've heard that that guy was pretty good at baseball.
Yeah, and as long as it's the 25th of July, 20, I mean, I was a math major. I shouldn't have to think much about this. But 59 years ago today, Ed Williams said, I look forward in his acceptance speech at the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
I look forward to the day that players like Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige can be put into this hall because the only reason they're not in is they weren't allowed to play.
That's right.
Anyway,
Yeah, that was a great. That was so great that Ted mentioned that in his speech.
yes, and that's what I always said. It was a very brief statement, but 5 years later, they started putting Negro leaguers in. Jackie had been in for 4 years then,
Yeah,
but he goes in as a major leaguer.
sure.
Okay. In 1930, July 5th, uh, Colonel Rupert opens Yankee Stadium up to the Negro Leagues. They play a doubleheader. Who do you think hit the first home run in Yankee Stadium by an African American?
Would it be rap?
It would be. So many people call it the house that Roos built. I call it the house that Dixon rehabbed.
I love it. I like it.
And it turned out that he hit three that day. It was a doubleheader. And until Bobby Mercer in 69 or 70 hit four, nobody had hit four in the stadium. Gehrig hit four, but not at home.
Okay.
Months later, Rapp has jumped the Black Sox to the Chicago American Giants. And this is one record they can't take away from him. There's no box score, so we won't add these four triples to his statistical record. But this is from the newspaper. Uh, Rap Dixon banged out four triples in the opening game of a doubleheader on August 6, 1930. Nobody else has done that in the 20th century. You got to go back to 1897 when Bill Joyce got four in a game. So Dixon's the only player, and he did it in a major league game, and there's newspaper evidence. So
Wow.
I'll fight for this one. The 14 straight hits, I'd like to see approved, but all right. 1932, Rapp joins Pittsburgh Crawfords. The manager has his feet on the first chair. That's Oscar Charleston, Hall of
Okay.
Famer. Moving to the far right, that's Judd Wilson, Hall of Famer. Next to him is Judy Johnson, Hall of Famer. Next to him is Josh Gibson, Hall of Famer. Rapp needs to go in the Hall, not just because he's on the Crawfords of 32, but he is statistically, you could, I think his OPS, I think he's second to Gibson that year. It's tough to beat Josh Gibson in your statistics.
Sure.
1933, this beautiful portrait is done by an artist named Andy Brown of Rugby, England. And I just got to show you, I hope you can see my pointer. This is me. He put me in the picture. This is the 1933 Negro League East West game, which was their All Star game. And you
Very
can,
cool.
if you know your ballparks, you know where this game was. Comiskey Park, Chicago. You
Okay.
can
Yeah.
you can tell with these, yes. And so he was elected by the fans to the first two All Star games, and he was named an All Star even before the game 9 times in his 11-year prime. In 1934, Johnny Mize was playing for this Concordia Eagles team for most of the winter, but he had to leave to report to the Cardinals camp, a Hall of Famer, Johnny Mize. To replace him, they brought Josh Gibson right here
Oh, wow.
in, and Josh wouldn't come without this man right here. That's Rap Dixon. And this team went on to win the Torrio Cup, which was the Dominican title in 1934. But I do got to point a couple other players out just to show you this is a great team. This is Hall of Famer Martin Diego right there,
Okay.
back row, tallest person. And next to Josh Gibson is Louis Aparicio.
Really?
Senior.
Senior.
This is
Wow.
Louis. This is Louis' dad. So this is one heck of a team.
Seriously.
You know, Rap got hurt in that game. So what I'm about to tell you, uh, the Pittsburgh Crawfords are very happy that the deal didn't get accepted. But at the winter meetings of the Negro Leagues in 1934, the Crawfords offered "Ooh, Papa Bell" even up for Rap Dixon. So that's Oscar Charleston and Gus Greenlee saying, "We like Dixon better than Bell."
Wow.
Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Stars, I think they felt the same way. They not only kept Dixon, but they had the gall to ask for Josh Gibson. So
Wow.
this is how high Rap Dixon was thought of back in 34. That same year, and this I referenced this earlier, Rap became the first professional manager for this man, Leon Day. 1935. Again, the Crawfords, this is Bell right here. They didn't get Dixon in that trade, and they won the first half of the 1935 Negro League season. The New York Cubans were a tail runner, second division team in the first half, but in between the halves, they picked up a pretty good ball player, Rap Dixon. And the Cubans win the second half title and go on to the Negro League playoffs, which was what stood in for a World Series that year.
Sure.
And look at the statistics of these four Hall of Famers. Martin DeHigo hit 192. Hool hit 130. They were facing Cuban pitching. And then Josh and Charlie had pretty good World Series, but they pale in comparison to Rap. Rap led that series in batting average, on base, was second to Charleston in slugging, and had the best OPS. So
Wow.
this is the last hurrah for Rap Dixon. It's not the end of his career, though. In 1937, this is good stuff. The dictator named Trujillo in the Dominican raided the Negro Leagues, in particular the Pittsburgh Crawfords. And he stole Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, Satchel Paige, and some other players uh, from what was the best team in the Negro Leagues. And he brought them down. And in the summer, in other words, they left their Negro League contracts to
Wow.
play in the Dominican. When they come back, all but Gibson are suspended. So these guys had to tour like Bingo Long, and they had to be their own management. And
Sure.
who do they turn to manage the team? Rap
Rap
Dixon.
Dixon. Wow.
And we do have a record. I know I haven't seen it, and this is again in the legend section, but
Sure.
I've seen it noted by more than one person. This team competes in the Denver Post tournament, which was the greatest available place for interracial competition. And in fact, the Negro League team had won in 36. But in 37, the trio All Stars come to Denver, managed by Dixon, and they win the Denver Post tournament. And just one story from here that I think is important, because this helps me tie Dixon to that managing job. In a John Hallway book, he does an oral history of Cool Papa Bell. And Bell's clearly on this team. And it's the only time in his career where he almost gets thrown out of a game. I'm not sure if he was thrown out or not, but he slides into third, spikes high at a third baseman who was a former major leaguer. His name was Hale. I think it was Bob Hale, but I'm not sure. But he cuts him, and both benches clear. And the first man to the riot is Dixon, which makes me think he was in that third base coaching job where managers often were back then. Because I do have records that indicate Dixon being the manager. There's this story that lends credence. And then there's also box scores where Rapp, who again was at the end of his career, he really wasn't uh, able to play at this level. But he's the first bats in the first inning. He's in the first three hitters in the lineup. And the only person that could do that is the manager.
Sure.
Oh, this is one last legend. Dixon is quoted in Harrisburg papers several times in the 40s uh, about this game should be integrated. We can play as good as they can and we can comport ourselves as good as they can. There's no reason for us not to be in the major leagues. And he put his money where his mouth is. He took a Harrisburg Giants team, no longer a major league team, to play the Hilldale Daisies, same, ditto, no longer a major league team. But Rapp had four Steelton High School players on his team, so
Wow.
he was putting his money where his mouth is and leading the way for the integration of the game. I think I'm done.
Thank you for that's a great presentation. Very enlightening. It looks like you put a lot of work into that PowerPoint. So thank you for sharing that. There's
You're
um,
welcome.
not a lot of information out there on rap. And we mentioned this off the record for those of you listening. As you know, in my podcast episodes, I like to always cite to the Saber biographies of players. I'm skeptical on Wikipedia and things like that. The Saber biography of Rap Dixon was written by Ted. Very good biography. So thank you for that, Ted. This is really interesting. I wanted to ask you a few questions here about rap. First of all, I had to get this in here in terms of the bio on rap because I know my wife would love this story. I'd love to hear more about this. That you mentioned in the Saber biography that he finally, it sounded like he was maybe 15, 16, 17, and I'm assuming he was already been in contact with some teams and wanted to leave home, but his excuse for leaving home was that the science teacher was telling him in school one day they were going to dissect a cat. And he
Yes.
said basically, no, I'm out. And literally
Mhm.
left the classroom, got his stuff, got on
Yes.
a train. I think he said it was to Atlantic City, signed with the team, and that's how his playing career started. Tell us
Yeah,
about that.
and that is how it's reported in Phil Dixon's wonderful book, The Photographic History of Negro League Baseball. I do think there's an error there. The picture that wraps on the Atlantic City Bacharach Giant picture has now been found by experts to be several years later.
Okay.
So we have no evidence of Rapp ever playing for Atlantic City. But the story's true, and I'm assuming it occurs around 1922. He'd be a junior or so in Steelton High School,
Hmm.
and his science teacher, actually biology, but I don't think they split them back then,
Sure.
starts to get into this dissection, and Rapp raises his hand. Can he use the lavatory? Goes, gets, empties his locker, goes to the bank. He's working in the steel mill now on
That's right.
weekends and summer, and he hops a train one stop to Harrisburg, and that's when he joins the Harrisburg Giants. Now, that's some conjecture, but there is no evidence of him being an Atlantic City
Okay.
Bacharach Giant. So it's a wonderful story, but it sort of misses that one detail.
So yeah, so wrong team, but he did leave. His impetus for leaving again. I'm sure he'd already been in contact with some teams and knew he was talented, and
Yeah,
you get to be about that age, you're ready to leave home anyway. But I thought my wife is a big cat lover. We've got our cat on the sleeping on the couch right here. So when they said you're gonna dissect a cat, he said, "Nope, I'm out. I'm gonna go play baseball."
that's
So
that's exactly right.
if you're listening and you need a good reason to vote for Rap, if for no other reason, he's a cat lover. Didn't want to dissect the cat. Thought that was great. And the other thing too, you mentioned in the biography, he worked in the steel mills, and he I had to look up pig iron. I've never worked in a steel mill, but pig iron. They said one of those things that made him so strong in his arms is that he had to pick up this pig iron. Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, there's two versions for where he got his nickname, and let's talk about the one I believe.
Yeah.
Ches Washington in the Pittsburgh Courier, based on an interview with Rap, says that it would be in that era, 1922, when he's playing for Steelton High School, although there's no newspaper evidence of that either. But he tells Chiz that yeah, because of the way I hit the ball, they called me Rap. That was the kid's nickname for him. So that's one version. And I can see I'm all wet here. Let me do the other version, then
For
I'll
sure.
get
Yeah,
to
yeah.
what you asked me. Sorry. The other version is coming up in the Great Migration, and this is a good one, from Kingston, Georgia to Steelton, Pennsylvania. They crossed a tidewater river called the Rappahannock. And apparently, Rappahannock, rap, he really loved the way that word flowed. And India Garnett, Rap's great niece, tells me that's where the nickname came from. So those are two versions. But in the article, this is the 74-year-old mind has a trouble focusing sometimes.
Sure.
But in that article, Ches Washington talks about how Rap's arm got so strong, and it was by throwing around pig iron or ignats or there's some term. These can be mammoth, but they also can be small enough. It's a piece of steel
Yeah.
uh, that not meant to be thrown, but Rap would throw it at some of the supervisor types or perhaps laggarts in the mill, and he he must have strengthened his arm in part because of that.
That's interesting. And I always heard stories about Mickey Mantle that said that, especially in his early days, he'd go back home to Oklahoma and he'd work in the mines there, I think the lead mines
Yep.
and he would say like twice, you look at those pictures of Mantle and his prime, his forearms, he's got Popeye forearms,
Oh,
and
yes,
he was,
yes.
swinging hammers and all this stuff, and he said that's why that was his off-season workout. So, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, even the stars in MLB, the days of the $30 million contracts, those are recent times. It was, even back then the major league stars are working jobs
Yep.
in the off season and stuff. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, this is fascinating. I want to talk to you a little bit. I've got some of Rap's statistics pulled up here on Baseball Reference. One season I wanted to focus on, it looks like in 1928. And there's a caveat here. The Negro League statistics are fascinating because the seasons are smaller. But that's his 1928 season seems like one for which he certainly would have won the MVP. He led the league in WAR, games played, hits, triples, home runs, RBI, stolen bases, walks, slugging percentage, OPS plus, total bases. I mean, just a monster season. I thought that was fascinating. And it looks
Yeah.
like he led the league in RBIs twice. And I thought it was fascinating because if you look at their stats, the career stats, the counting numbers are not there because they played smaller or shorter seasons. But when you take his stats and Baseball Reference spreads them out over a 162 game average, his 162 game average comes out per season for 162 games 141 runs, 196 hits, 34 doubles, 13 triples, 21 home runs, 132 RBI, 33 stolen bases, 336 batting average. I mean, these are insane. So, had he had the opportunity to play full seasons, who knows what kind of stats he's going to put up, you know?
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
The baseball reference statistics, while they are more flattering to Rap by a
Yeah.
little bit, uh, and they are the official. Uh, I mean, MLB.com, I think, has another set that's largely based on them,
Yeah.
baseball reference. But here's the deal, those are seam head stats.
Okay.
Baseball reference makes no bones about it. They license it from seam heads, but
Really?
they only show those years that are considered major by Major League Baseball. These stat pools are so small to begin with. I prefer to use the seam head stats. And if you go there, you'll see a very similar story, but Rap is no longer a 336 hitter, he's a 328 hitter. And that's
Okay.
important to note because that means he's facing better competition if you count those more games. So
Interesting.
I, I like what you brought up there. There's one other backstory here that I hate to admit. Um, Last year we had our convention in Cooperstown. I'm talking about the Sabre Negro League convention known as the Jerry Malloy. Uh, and I hadn't been beaten in trivia in a decade now, mostly because I had been the MC. I was Art Fleming,
Right.
but I won my previous three times out. And here someone asked me a question that you just spoken about. Who led the league in 1928 in all these categories? And I said, Geno Smith. In other words, I missed a question with the answer was Rap Dixon. And I ended up losing that competition, last year's competition, by less than a point.
Oh, wow.
So, anyway,
Wow.
I
That's
had to
fascinating.
bring
Well,
that up.
I wanted to ask you a little bit. So it sounds like he was on Rap Dixon was on the ballot in 2006 and didn't get in, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know, has he been on the ballot since? Was that his only time?
No, he hasn't been. This is the shame. Uh, Major League Baseball, for all their shortcomings, has done a spectacular job on the Negro Leagues. December 16th, 2020, they declared them major, seven specific leagues. And in 2024, May 31st, June 1, they brought the statistics into the record book. Spectacular. The Hall of Fame in 24 had a wonderful spring. They redid the East West game, played with modern athletes, uh, a lot of African American, but also white, a mixed version of the East West Classic. They updated their uh, exhibit. They just have published a book by Gerald Early on black baseball. And I'm leaving out a couple of other things. But what they fail to realize, and we don't want to get me started on this,
Yeah.
while they are a museum, and while they've done great things, as I just mentioned, as a museum, we look at it as a Hall of Fame. And they have not inducted a single player from the Negro Leagues since 2006. They have put Buck O'Neill in as a manager, Bud
Mhm.
Fowler in as a pioneer or something, and Minnie Minoso in as a major leaguer. And they've had others on the ballot to answer your question, but not Rap. They need to repeat what they did in '06 once or twice more. Um, and just, I know we're getting near the Rap, but I think that, no pun intended, but I do think this is a good point. There are 137 players in the Hall who debuted in the traditional major leagues before Jackie. There are only 32 who debuted in the Negro Leagues in the segregated era, and I'm including Doby, Campy, Minnie, and Roy, and
Yeah.
yeah, and Roy. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio of traditional major leaguers compared to Negro leaguers, despite the fact that every accounting bill Ken Burns says Negro League teams beat white major league teams 70% of the time. That's an
Mhm.
exaggeration, and that's another topic. But the point is, every compilation I've ever seen says they played 500 ball. It's my opinion that there should be 69 players in the Hall of Fame if they're to do their job as an educational 501c3. There's only 28, so 41 more players, and certainly that would include Rap, should be in the Hall.
I agree with you. And when I was on Mitch Bernstein's podcast, we brought this up, and I think the Negro League players are underrepresented. And it's a question of how, how to try to get them on the ballot more. Just and it's interesting because, I talked about it in my podcast last year, some of the Veterans Committee ballots, you've got recent players, and I'm so happy like Dave Parker got in and Dick Allen and
Yeah,
Fred McGriff and all these guys deserve to be in. But how do you compare those players to Vic
yes,
Harris and John Donaldson? I mean, you can't, because you look at John Donaldson's career, for example. I mentioned just Vic Harris and John Donaldson because they were on the ballot this past year.
they're in the ballot.
How are these guys not in the Hall of Fame? John Donaldson
Well,
was the he barnstormed, but that's all. He predates the Negro Leagues. His
yeah,
statistics are incredible, and you can say yes, he's playing against local farmers, whatever. Well, that's the only people he was allowed to play with.
yeah.
But
Well,
even as a pioneer, as someone that really everything that you know about Satchel Paige, you kind of learned from John Donaldson. A lot of the
yeah.
pitching. So
John
yeah.
John Donaldson, as you started to get to, should be a first ballot Hall of Famer
Oh, absolutely.
as a team owner, as a manager, as a multi-position player, as a scout, but he shouldn't be in as a pitcher. Your words, he pitched against a bunch of farmers. I
Yeah.
don't know that I'd go quite that far, but I can tell you this. If you
Yeah.
go to the Seamheads database,
Okay.
he has a losing record in games that they deem Negro Leaguers.
Really.
And similar, if you go to Pete Gorton, who of course is the greatest John Donaldson promoter, he's like
Yeah.
the John Donaldson's Ted Knorr for Rap Dixon.
Sure.
But
Sure.
even his numbers show a 46-50 record. This is as of 2020. Pete's pretty good. He's probably got more games now, but a 46-50 record against professional teams.
Wow.
So when there's a guy like Nip Winters, a left-handed pitcher, not in, I would have a problem with Donaldson going in as a pitcher.
Okay, interesting. Well, that's a separate conversation for a separate time, but it's just it's difficult to compare the Negro League players to the modern players as two different eras, two different times. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do we rectify this? Do we have, a veterans committee every year that looks specifically at Negro League players to try to get more in? I mean, it seemed like
Uh,
that might work for me because when you lump them
we
in, there's a recency bias, I feel like. And when you say, okay, here's a couple players that you're going to have to do your homework on to learn about because you may not know about, and we're going to put them in the same ballot as people who not only did you watch play, but you might have played with or against, or you might be
yeah,
friends with, like Dave Parker or Don Mattingly or Dale Murphy or all these Fred McGriff and stuff. There's a recency bias. Oh yeah, Dave Parker, Fred McGriff.
yeah,
Yeah, I automatically know who this person is and who their stats are. And I don't have to do any work, so to speak. So it's almost
true.
unfair to put them on the same ballot as modern players, I think, you know?
Oh, no doubt. Two points there. One, they should, as you say, the ballot needs to be, and I hate to offer this, but I think it's a good word because it teaches us about history. The ballot needs to be segregated, not for the same reason. This is a teaching tool. So that's one thing that would take away what you're talking about. And then the voters, right now, the voters don't know anything about Negro League Baseball.
They
There was,
don't.
I think, two, Larry Lester and Leslie Heafy the last time around. There was a few more the previous time. But the voters need to, just like in 2006, the voters need to know about the Negro Leagues. And if they do those two things and meet every year, why would you wait? Put one or two in. There's 41 missing, in my opinion. I'd like to see 41 go in next summer, but I understand that ain't happening. But
Yeah. Well,
they should
and
meet every year until that 28 approaches 69.
to be fair to any Negro League players, 19th century players. We talked about this in the email. There's a lot of 19th century
Yeah,
players
yeah,
that I think should be in the Hall of Fame. One of my next episodes is going to be about George von Haltren. I've talked about Bill Dolan on my podcast. I'm going to do an episode about him. There's a lot of 19th century players, and it's sort of the same issue with the recency bias. A lot of the voters on these veterans committee ballots are former players, former managers, and some journalists, and they'll try to pepper in one or two historians. And I don't. It's a closed door. It's a smoke-filled room, so to speak. So again, it's easy, especially when you have players. I'll look and try to predict based on what players and managers are there who I think they're going to vote for. I say, oh, this guy played with so and so and so and so, and if it's like, hey, are you going to vote for your friend that you played with? Or are you going to vote for a player either from the Negro Leagues or the dead ball era, 19th century that, here's a dossier on. It's like, do I have to read this? Like, I want to go to lunch. I'm going to vote for my buddy. And so it's unfair to put um,
No doubt about it.
historical players with modern players. I just think it's weird. And I see your point. And yeah, I don't want to necessarily use that word. And I've thought about that, the optics of like making a separate, but you don't want to make, you want to be careful optically, but if they just had maybe two different veterans committee ballots every year, one to look at eras, modern eras, and one, you could do Negro Leagues and 19th century dead ball, just historical players. I just don't think it's fair in terms of a timeline to have players that are recent that we watched and played with or managed at putting with players that frankly most of us aren't familiar with, that we have to do homework to learn about. And once you do the homework, like with John Donaldson's case, you can find, well, who was he pitching against? Like, well, it gets complicated, and they'll say, you know what, I'm just going to vote for Dave Parker and Dick Allen, which is what happened. So and I'm
Yeah.
over the moon that Dick Allen and Dave Parker are in the Hall of Fame, but I'm also looking at John Donaldson and Vic Harris thinking these guys have incredible stories as player, manager, pioneer, whatever box you want to check, but certainly belong in the Hall of Fame. How you want to characterize them as player, pioneer? Because Vic Harris, not to get off on a soapbox here, but
Mhm.
I kind of
Nope.
compared him to like Lou Piniella or Joe Torre because he was a very good player and then a very good
He is.
manager. And I feel like there's some players, or I feel like a lot of players that were borderline Hall of Famers go on to have good managing careers, and people sort of
Yeah.
just put them in because they've been around for a while.
And Vic
Not,
Harris doesn't have a good managerial career.
yeah,
He's got the highest winning
yeah,
percentage of any major league manager because he's a major league manager now.
yeah.
Second is Dave Roberts, by the way.
Dave Roberts is he's on a tear right now. It's gonna get better. Anyway, I'm a Braves fan, but we get off on this. Like watching the Dodgers now, it's like the Bulls in the '90s. It's like I don't care what team you're cheering for. You can't. You got to watch the Dodgers what they're doing. I mean, they might. Who knows? They might three-peat or four-peat. Who knows? Sky's the limit right now with the Dodgers. Um, but anyway, that's another subject for another time. I don't want to keep you too much longer, Ted. I really appreciate this. I wanted to see if you had any closing sort of elevator pitch arguments for Rap Dixon's induction into the Hall of Fame. I think you've presented his statistics very well, but if you were in an elevator with some folks on their way to vote and Rap were on the ballot, and what's your elevator pitch for Rap Dixon?
This is not going to focus strictly on rap,
Sure,
but there are 29 outfielders, counting Harold Baines, because he would have had to been an outfielder pre-integration. There was no DH.
sure,
Of those 29 that have been began careers since Jackie, 23 are players of color. There's only 6 white, not to make a racial situation about it, but there's 6 white outfielders out of 29. Looking prior to 47, there are 48 outfielders in the Hall. 7 are Negro Leaguers. So that's my elevator case for putting a half dozen. I think there should be one dozen would do the trick.
yeah,
Uh, and that would still pale. It would be if they put a dozen in, there would be 19 in out of 60, where there's been 23 out of 29 earned. So that's my fielder pitch, and I think Rap leads the way.
yeah. And I'll just say this: the study of the Negro Leagues is fascinating. American history is complicated, and there's been a you know bad history of racism, segregation in this country. And Major League Baseball, you said it has done a lot of tremendous things just in the past few years to enlighten and educate everyone in the Negro Leagues. I loved watching the game that they had down in Birmingham, down at
Oh,
Rickwood Field.
wonderful.
I've got a book about Rickwood Field. My parents are from Alabama. My dad, he played Little League and they had games at Rickwood Field and stuff. So,
Mm.
and Bob Kendrick was there. I love hearing Bob talk about the
Yep.
Negro League.
Yep.
So it's amazing to educate everyone. So I'm hoping that this will result in players like Rap Dixon, Vic Harris, some of these, and then more. There's more that I'm not even familiar with. I'm learning more every day. I'm hoping that they get in because they deserve to be in. They're great players, and yeah, we can tweak the stats a little bit, but when you look at their stats as put to 162 game average, it's just a huge what if. And for that reason, you have to evaluate them a little bit differently. And I love how you brought in the analysis of other players, the eyeball test, so to speak, because that's something I like to focus on my podcast. We can crunch numbers all day at a computer, but it's different than being on a field in the heat and the sweat and playing and seeing somebody else as a fellow player saying, hey, we're all hot and tired and we've been on the road, but this guy is still throwing gas or hitting home runs. He's on a different level. So getting the other players to comment on who they think is the best is really important, especially back then. And to tie it in to close this book about Rickwood Field, you talked about Major League players playing Negro League players. Without looking at the stats, just anecdotally, there's some great stories about Dizzy Dean and Satchel going head to head. And it was, I don't remember who, won more, one lost, but both sides, Dizzy and Satchel walked away from there saying, "Hey, this is the best pitcher I've ever pitched against."
Yep.
Comments like that, tons of comments like that from players, major league players who encountered Negro League teams in some of these barnstorming events, saying such and such, one of the best pitchers, one of the best hitters. This player could have easily played in the big leagues, been a star. So hearing that from other players is important, I think, especially when the statistics don't exactly match each other. So anyway, well, I'll talk all day, and I know you could talk all day, Ted. But thanks for coming on. And if is there
Thanks
anything
for
that you want to
having me.
mention to people that you're working on, or any appearances you're going to be making? Anything you want to plug? I
Well,
always like to give my guests a
yeah.
chance to plug something before they leave.
Okay. Well, I would like to say, in case anybody, including yourself, are turned on by the study of Negro Leagues, the Sabre Negro League convention is going to be August 7th through 9th in Louisville. And that's a
Great.
great town with all kinds of history.
Oh yeah.
And it's now called the Jerry Malloy Negro League Research Conference. I happened to found that conference in Harrisburg in 1998, so I'm a little prejudiced,
Very
but
cool.
we're going to have a wonderful time. And I'm just going to be viewing, I'm not doing anything, just attending. And I'd recommend anyone interested, and you can find it at saber.org/Malloy. That should do it. Um, Nicely priced, a beautiful hotel, also reasonably priced.
That sounds great. I'll have to reach out to you. My wife and I have plans right now that week to be out of town, but maybe for next summer, if that's an annual thing you guys are doing, I'd love to check that out.
It is. This is our 25th year. It is annual. You definitely want to check it out. We haven't really started looking at next year, but we got to get on that pretty soon.
Yeah, you got it. Well, there's always wait till this year's over, and then you can plan for next year. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Ted, well, thank you so much for coming on here. I'll be putting this out on YouTube and also on my podcast with a little bit of an intro and an outro, and I'll probably be in touch with you to get your feedback on some things. So, thank you so much, Ted, and I'm going to sign off right here. Okay.
All righty, Russell. See you
Hey,
next time.
see ya.